Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink program. I'm your host, Chiara Rimella. Coming up, we get tips from Benjamina Ebuehi on the most effective and satisfying puddings to make when it's your turn to bring dessert.
I kind of fell into that role and have not managed to escape it. And now it's just, that is my title. If I'm having people around, if I'm going somewhere, that I will always volunteer to bring dessert.
Also on the programme, we venture to the Azores to meet a new wave of winemakers.
We are fighting against nature every day. It's hurricanes. But then wines are amazing, and that's what makes this place unique.
Plus, we explore the places where community is built through food in London. All that here in The Menu on Monocle Radio. It's always a joy to receive an invitation for a lively dinner party or a cocktail soirée, but every good guest knows that you should always bring something along for the host. Often that just means gifting a great bottle of Pinot Noir or Prosecco to start things off, but what about if you're asked to provide dessert? Too often, sweet courses are a bit of an afterthought when devising a menu for a meal at home, and the temptation is to buy some ice cream and call it a day. But Benjamina Ebuehi's new book, I'll Bring Dessert, should inspire everyone to put more effort into their puddings. From gingerbread mascarpone roulade to preserved lemon cookies, Benjamina brings together dozens of recipes aimed at enticing you into preparing your own sweet treats. Her suggestions may be simple to make, but they are still as impressive as they are delicious. Benjamina joined me in the studio at Midori House, and I started by asking her about her passion for all things sugary.
For me, it's just, I've always loved sugar. I've always loved sweet things. I've always just loved chocolate and butter and cream and just some of the best things in the world of food. But dessert especially, like when you're going out for a meal or you're at your friend's house and you know that dessert is coming, it's just that like inside joy that's like, oh my gosh, dessert. It's just the anticipation that I love and I just can't get enough of. So for me, it's more than just eating it. It's like the expectation and the what's to come and like the night isn't quite finished yet. That sort of vibe that I really love.
What I really love about your book starts from the title of it, because obviously you can anticipate dessert at a restaurant as well. But the book is called I'll Bring Dessert, and it immediately conjures up a vibe. We know where we are. We know what's happening. And it is that specific thing of having dessert at a dinner party. Someone's invited you. It's very cozy. It's friends. It's family. How did you become the person who was dedicated to making dessert? How did you become the dessert person at parties? And why, I suppose, do you love desserts at dinner parties specifically, perhaps more so than in other types of contexts?
How did I become the dessert person? I think because I've baked for so long. I've been that person in like my friendship groups and my family who would, just experiment or just make cakes and make cupcakes. Back in the day, that's how I started, with little cupcakes and cookies and sorts of things. And I just really enjoyed it. And so I put more time into it and I'd spend my weekends just practicing different recipes. And because I loved it so much and I'd always be trying new things, I'd be giving them to my friends, try this, give me some feedback on that. And so that's how I sort of became the person who was always making something and always baking something sweet. And I love hosting. I'm, again, out of my friendship group, I'm the one who will be doing most of the hosting. Come round, whether it's a bit more fancy and when got the tablecloths, or it's just a really casual, just come round on a Thursday evening and let's just have a chill and I'll make something. And I would always serve dessert. Most of the time I would serve more than one. Like I'm always a friend that would be like, there's options.
Yeah.
I want to give people options. If you don't like something creamy, then there'll be something fruity. If you're not really a big chocolate person, I'll make sure there's something a bit contrasting. And so I kind of fell into that role and have not managed to escape it. And now it's just, that is my title. If I'm having people around, if I'm going somewhere, that I will always volunteer to bring dessert.
So what I love about this book is that it just feels so kind of warm-hearted. It really does feel like you are bringing these gifts to people. And frequently when you speak to pastry chefs or to people who enjoy making the sweet side of the menu, they'll always talk about precision and how pastry making is such a science. And it is, but is there a bit of wiggle room for experimentation and letting things kind of happen a little bit? Or what's your relationship with the precision that is required of pastry sometimes?
I think I hear that a lot when people say, oh, I love cooking, but baking and that kind of thing scares me because it's so accurate and it's so scientific. And I just tell people, just relax with it. Just approach it with fun and with just enjoyment of it. There are parts of it that there is a level of accuracy that is required in order to get specific results. But I don't like people to focus on that. And I think once you learn the basics, the kind of fundamentals of just how to make a very simple pastry, how to make a very simple sponge. Once you've got those down, then I always encourage people to have fun with it. It doesn't have to look textbook perfect or super Instagrammable. As long as it tastes great and you've had a really enjoyable time making it, I think that's what's super important. So I don't like reminding people how strict it is and how rigid it is. I think once you've got the basics down and you understand why things work, then the possibilities are endless. And have fun and just try stuff, experiment, have fun in the kitchen. It shouldn't be as rigid as people think it should be.
Thankfully,
yes.
I take a lot of I take a lot of comfort from that. Well, you mentioned earlier that your kind of journey into baking started with the cupcakes and giving them around. But I wonder what your food memories that led you into this world of baking and into desserts are. When you were writing the book, for example, which desserts were in the back of your mind in terms of the things that really drew you into making this your career?
I think a lot of it started in school, like school dinners. So growing up, my mum didn't really bake much, cooked a lot, but it was never a thing just to sort of have desserts after a meal. But school was where you have your school lunch and there was every single day, there was something sweet to have afterwards, whether it was like rice pudding or school cake with very lumpy cold custard.
Those terrible memories actually become the sweetest things.
Exactly. And you look back and it's like, I love school dinners because you would always get like cake or something at the end. And that was just like blew my mind. And then so I think it was those memories that really stuck with me of, I just remember always being so excited at what was for dessert after school dinners. So those sort of recipes like rice pudding, there's a rice pudding in the book as well. It's just that like nostalgia and that comfort. And the puddings that people actually want to eat and not super technical or it's going to take you 5 days to make it and you've got to be, again, like be super precise and exact. But I wanted to have puddings that people would love and look at and would evoke memories from their own past. And they just say, yeah, I really want to make that. I really want to eat that.
There's a whole side of the book that is custard related. And then there's a nutty chapter, there's a chocolate chapter. Can you talk to us about why you decided to divide it like this? Because it kind of almost, at the beginning of the book, you say it's almost like following a vibe that you think, you know, you might want to lean into when you go to someone's house. I suppose the question is, when you go to somebody's house, how do you suss out the vibe? And what are the vibes that you're kind of describing in the book?
I think I use the word vibe a lot. Like just in my general speak, I'm like, what's the vibe? What's the vibe check of where I'm going? And so if I'm doing something for my friends, which I know quite well, I usually know, I guess, the vibe and what they're into. And so, yeah, for my group of friends, they're quite like, they're not super into nutty things. So more fruity, creamy things usually goes down well. I guess, how would you suss out the vibe? I think in terms of maybe like even time of day that you're doing it. So these desserts aren't just for like evening fancy dinner parties. It could be a Saturday brunch kind of thing and I'm going to bring dessert. And so starting with that is a good way to kind of gauge, okay, is it an evening affair? Is it a fancy tablecloth type dinner party where I may want to bring something a bit richer, something quite chocolatey? Or is it maybe more of a spring brunch thing and I want something a bit lighter and a bit fruity? And also the time of year will dictate what you might bring. Summertime, there's loads of fruit. You've got peaches, you've got lots of fresh berries. And so that will kind of dictate the vibe. Are you eating inside? Are you eating outside? Is it a boiling hot day? Maybe you don't want to bring something that might just melt on the way or get like really sticky. Is it a cold winter's day? Do you want something warm and cozy that you can like serve with custard? And so those are all the like little cues that I use to kind of suss out the vibe. So like the natural external factors, and then thinking about the people who are going to be there. Is it an older crowd? Is it a younger crowd? Are people quite fussy, or are you with a crowd that will try absolutely anything? And maybe that's the time to try one of the recipes that is a bit more, not everyone will like this, but I think this group will be receptive to it. So those little things can help you suss out the vibe.
I suppose, can you just guide us to a couple of recipes that are particularly dear to you and that you feel really represent your approach to cooking?
There's so many. I'm just like,
I know.
I want to do all of them. Okay, maybe from fruity, the preserved lemon and olive oil cookies. They're so simple, but so, I guess, different. You don't really see preserved lemon in cookies very much in sweet baking. And I think they represent me because they are very simple to put together. You need one bowl and you kind of just put everything in and mix. And so it's quite approachable, even though the ingredients might sound, that's a bit different. I've not had that before. But it's a very straightforward recipe. It's quite simple to make, doesn't take too long. But flavour-wise, it is something that feels different and like interesting, but it's not super technical. Anyone can make that. You don't need to have baked for years and years. And so, yeah, this is something that when you bring, it's a little bit unexpected, but most people, I think, will still really like it. And I just have these simply on their own with a coffee, so maybe quite a casual get-together, or an ice cream sandwich is also a very good way to have them, that I do sometimes as well.
Oh, wow, that is genius.
Yeah, so if you wanted to zhuzh it up a little bit, you could do it as an ice cream sandwich.
What kind of flavour ice cream would you recommend for the middle?
I would just do a really good, simple vanilla, and you could even drizzle a bit of extra olive oil on it as well if you fancied, so that's what I'd go for.
Benjamina Ebuehi speaking to me in the studio at Midori House. This is the menu. Now we head to the middle of the North Atlantic, to the Azores, a Portuguese archipelago home to some of the most unique vineyards on Earth. On the island of Pico, a new wave of winemakers have been working on the ancient volcanic land to revive the once popular trade and focus their attention on local grape varietals. Here, vines grow on stone terraces woven into the black basalt lava fields. The dramatic scenery is a sight to behold and has also begun to spark interest from abroad, with many producers in the region earning recognition and winning awards for their rare Atlantic wines. Monocle correspondent Ivan Carvalho paid a visit to the island of Pico and brought back this report.
Few places on Earth possess as much natural allure as the Azores. The 9-island chain is dotted with lush vegetation, hot springs, and lakes that were once volcanic craters. On the island of Pico, where winemaking has been practiced for centuries, vineyards sit a few meters from the crashing waves of the Atlantic. Thanks to a climate tempered by the Gulf Stream and volcanic soils, wineries here harvest grapes that produce very distinctive wines. One remarkable wine from Pico is made by Fortunato Garcia of Zar Winery. Garcia takes me on a walk through his oceanfront vineyards at Criação Velha, an area declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2004.
Here we are, like 5 meters from the ocean, in one of the main places that we used to roll the barrels to the sea. So these places here were called rola-pipas, which literally means rolling barrels. Little boats then would pick up the barrels and take to the bigger boats to export. So here we are with the oceans in our feet.
Nowadays, of course, Pico producers bottle their wines here in the cellars, and Fortunato Garcia tends to vines, some as old as 120 years, growing the local grape varieties of Verdelho, Arinto dos Açores, and Trantes do Pico. He makes a famous late-harvest wine called Zar, which is unfortified and which has become a unicorn of sorts in the wine world. Winemaker Fortunato Garcia.
The main thing here is that Czar is a completely natural grape juice. And if it's not a perfect wine, or if I have to do something to the wine to correct, it will never become a Czar. It will be something else. The main thing that we have, and that's why our wine is considered unique in the world by many, by enology teachers, by master sommeliers, by the journalists, it's because it's the only known wine in the world that naturally reach 19 or 20% of alcohol content. And when I say natural, it's with natural fermentations with our, what I call crazy indigenous yeasts, because they work in environments that, according to enology books, it's not possible to work.
So when you have a bottle of Czar, what can people expect in the palate?
what you can expect is a very complex and a wine that it's very rich in your nose and in your mouth. So in your nose, you can have a lot of raisins, a lot of nuts, a lot of lemon or, citrus, a lot of orange peel, caramelized orange peel in your mouth. What I think it's amazing about my wine is that you're going to find a little bit sugar in the tip of your tongue. You're going to find acidity on your sides. You're going to find salt in the middle. And when you swallow that wine, all of these things come together so nicely, like holding hands, that you really understand all of them and nothing is winning. Understanding also that the natural alcohol that involves all of this, it makes him then be all blend in together perfectly. Also, I already had a lot of people that left here after trying my wine, and 10 minutes after they called me and said, "Oh my God, how can this be that I still have your wine in my mouth?" So that's what people expect. A wine that probably you never tried in your life in complexity and especially in longevity in your mouth. So it will last 10 or 15 minutes, not disappearing, which normal wines disappear in 12, 15 seconds.
Another standout producer on Pico is Azores Wine Company. Its sleek, modernist winery sits among small rectangular plots divided by short rock walls, where vines grow on lava soils and basalt rock. Here one finds award-winning wines developed by the talented enologist Antonio Massanita. I meet with Azores Wine Company co-founder Philippe Rocha.
First of all, it's an amazing place to make wines, but very difficult. So we are fighting against nature every day. It's a combination of rain, sun, and humidity. It's the sea salt. It's hurricanes. But then wines are amazing. And that's what makes this place unique. Okay, so I'm pouring Vinha Centenária. So it's a vineyard located in Criação Velha in Pico Island. So Criação Velha is the area that was left after powdery mildew and phylloxera attack in the 19th century. So only 1% of the old area was left. Arinto dos Açores is the dominant grape varietal in this area in the island. This grape varietal is native from Azores. The mother is Verdelho, also born in Azores, so descendant from the French Savagnin. The other one is Terrantez do Pico, almost extinct. But Arinto dos Açores is the dominant grape varietals in the old vineyards. It's the most planted grape because it's the most resistant.
The scenic landscape of the Azores and its terroir were a siren call to Italian couple Cinzia Caiazzo and Gianni Mancasola. In 2015, the couple from Florence set up their winery, Adega do Vulcão, to make white wines with great texture and minerality. Their vineyards stand not far from the slopes of Mount Pico, a dormant stratovolcano that marks the highest point in Portugal. Gianni points out the role played by the vast network of curage, the traditional network of low stone walls separating vineyards.
It's very important for the quality of the grapes and for the maturation. In the summer, during the day, the stones, the black stones, absorb the heat of the sun, and this heat is released during the night. So you have a constant distribution of heat during the day and during the night, and this is going to facilitate the maturation of the grapes. It's one of the secrets of the quality of the Pico wine.
His wife Cinzia then pours a white wine from Adega do Vulcão's cellar, a blend of grapes from two islands, Pico and the adjacent island of Faial.
I'm opening for you a bottle of Amechambar 2021. This is a special wine, unique wine. The Amechambar maintained all the specific characteristics of the Azores wines in terms of salinity, acidity, minerality. But the specific characteristic of the Amechambar is the one freshness due to the very young terroir of the Faial Island.
So those grapes from there, together with Pico, give you that extra sort of advantage, you would say?
In Faial, we have the hash, the volcanic hash. It's a very young terroir, it's different terroir, it's a unique terroir.
Volcanic soils, situated next to the pounding Atlantic surf, make for unforgettable scenes. And in the cellars, winemakers here are delivering memorable vintages that leave a lasting impression on drinkers' palates. For Monocle, in the Azores, I'm Ivan Carvalho.
Ivan Carvalho reporting there. This is The Menu. Now it's time for the week's top food and drink headlines. Here is Monocle's George Ruskin.
In Florida, a Disneyland restaurant has won its first ever Michelin star. The modern American eatery Victorian Albert's is the first theme park outpost to achieve the accolade. With a strict no children policy and a formal dress code, the restaurant has become a hot ticket, with guests booking reservations at 6 a.m. up to 60 days in advance. Moët & Chandon has announced plans to revolutionise vineyard management with autonomous robots capable of efficiently spraying vines and weeding on its steep slopes. Developed in collaboration with the Japanese machinery firm Yanmar, the robot tractors have successfully undergone trials in the Champagne region. Moët also plans to introduce it to the global viniculture market. The country music icon Dolly Parton is set to launch her own range of alcoholic drinks under the trademark Parton Family Cellars. The move will expand her business empire and could include wines as early as this year. Parton, who is known to favour red wine, will be the latest in a series of celebrities to launch drinks ranges. Those are the week's food and drink headlines. Now back to Chiara.
Thanks, George. You're listening to The Menu. And finally, our experience of food in cities is usually tied to the exciting restaurants we've tried, the glowing reviews we've read in the newspapers, or the recommendations from our in-the-know friends. However, food in urban areas can be a potent tool to build community, particularly for those who have relocated to a city from abroad and are looking for ways to connect with their own heritage and other people around them. Throughout London, community kitchens play a vital role in building social cohesion. These are the spaces that a new book of essays, London Feeds Itself, set out to celebrate. Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs sat down with two of the featured essayists, Barclay Bram and Jenny Lau. She started by asking Jenny about the food on offer at the Luncheon Club at Hackney Chinese Community Services.
So we always have rice, that's a non-negotiable, as well as Chinese soup, which is not like the kind of soup you would know in the West. So Chinese soup is always a kind of bone broth-based, clear broth with lots of fresh vegetables and changing ingredients. And then it's based around donations that the centre gets. So this might be donated vegetables from an Asian wholesaler. There's always a meat option, something that's probably quite vegetarian friendly. Sometimes there's steamed fish, tofu. It really depends, and it's very much up to the chef to decide as well. But what is crucial is that these dishes provide a taste of home to the community members. And it's often stuff that I think you would not get anywhere else, and certainly not in any Chinese restaurant in the UK.
And Barclay, I want to bring you in. So your essay focuses on kind of two venues. Maybe firstly, you could just introduce what they are.
Yeah, so I was writing about Polish clubs, and these existed from about, after World War II, basically to preserve Polish identity in the UK. During World War II, many Poles came over, and actually in the Battle of Britain, many Polish pilots fought. And these clubs kind of existed to preserve Polish identity at a time when people couldn't return to Poland because of the Iron Curtain. And what I was looking at was how that identity was kind of preserved in aspic, and how Poland, obviously went through the Soviet era and then independence, and how Poland had kind of moved on. And then in 2004, so coming up in May, we have the 20-year anniversary of Poland's ascension to the EU. And suddenly we had this huge influx of 1 million Poles who arrived in the UK, and they became the second largest diaspora for almost a 20-year period, though they're now leaving. And it's about this kind of meeting between these two visions of Poland. So the Polish identity that came over with these, enterprising Poles in sort of 2004, economic migrants who were seeking a better life in Britain and to make money and then return back to Poland. and the Poland that had kind of existed in these clubs to preserve a Poland that no longer existed. And one of the key venues I write about is Ognisko, which is it's called the Polish Hearth, and it's the longest standing Polish club. It was actually the seat of the Polish government in exile during the war and then afterwards. And my grandfather was the Polish Minister for Health in exile. So he used to work there. And so my dad actually grew up going to Ognisko, and my dad is now in his 70s, and we've sort of celebrated every major life event at the restaurant at Ognisko, including his 70th birthday a few years ago. So it's a really special place to me, and the food is actually unbelievably good.
You mentioned your father there, and you talk in the essay about how he's kind of reclaimed his Polish identity over time. How has that interlinked with food?
Growing up, my dad would talk about Poland, and it was kind of present, but it wasn't a core tenet, I would say, of his identity. He felt sort of very European. He met my mum in Italy. My mum is Swiss. So we kind of had this sort of Central European kind of vibe in the house, but it was never specifically from anywhere. And then with Brexit, my dad suddenly was like, whoa, I don't really recognize this place, even though he's been here, the vast majority of his life. And suddenly he felt this massive disconnect. And if he wasn't British in that sense, he feels very much like a Londoner, which is also how I feel. And suddenly he felt this kind of disconnect and rejection. And so he applied for his Polish passport, and he got it last year. And I actually found out yesterday that I got my Polish citizenship as a result. So this is a well-timed interview. But what I started to notice was the second that my dad kind of had this switch in himself that, okay, what am I? I'm Polish. Suddenly I would open the fridge whenever I would go home, and there'd be cabanos, there'd be sleds, there'd be all of these cheeses, cheesecakes, poppy seed cake. There'd be all of these ingredients. And I realized he'd basically stopped going to regular supermarkets. He now only went to the Polski Sklep, and he was only buying Polish ingredients. And then I would hear him suddenly, having never really heard him speak Polish growing up, every time a builder would be in the vicinity, not even doing anything to do with us, my dad would go and speak to them in Polish. And suddenly it was like, this unfurling of layers that I had never really seen before. And it's always a really interesting thing, right? When you realize that your parents have had these big lives before your existence, and you get a sudden insight into it. And so somewhere in him had always been this Polish man waiting to find its expression. And now, I live in the shadow of that, which is really nice.
Jenny, to go back to you mentioned how the Hackney Chinese Community Services provides people with a taste of home. It's not just the space and feeling comfortable in the space, but that real having the flavours and the taste and that really kind of familiar food, as you say, that is very different to what you might find in a restaurant in London. How important is that for those people who are visiting the centre?
I think what Barclay said was very interesting, because it's this idea of using food as a way to become and to explore. And it's this kind of playing field where you can test the waters of your identity. And food is obviously this very gross way to explore that and to ask perhaps questions or to test hypotheses about who you are or who you'd like to be. I primarily work with the younger generation of East and Southeast Asians. Quite often when you're starting to question these aspects of your cultural identity that you may have buried previously, food and other sort of cultural practices are the first things that you would land on. So what I found interesting is that people are kind of rejecting or questioning what is refracted back to them in a restaurant, for example, or in a kind of commercialized setting. Because for me personally, I look at the Chinese food that is presented to me in somewhere like Chinatown or even, your average Chinese takeaway, and I'm going, well, that's not my taste of home. So I'm not quite sure that menu represents me entirely, but what I do seek out is that connection, and so really I think that people are coming to Hackney Chinese not just because the food tastes homey or comforting, but it's the connections that they're making over the table. You know, I write about lunch clubs and how they're constantly under threat of funding cuts from local councils. I think Hackney Council has still been quite generous towards the lunch club network, but every year it's kind of ringing the death knell. You know, this is the last year of funding. So one of the core issues we've been tackling is how do we make this community kitchen self-sustaining and not have to rely on funding. So I think a quite interesting model we're working with is a kind of 50-50 commercial and also publicly funded financial model. So we've opened up the community kitchen to private hires, and that's something I spearheaded a few years ago, which was to introduce the first supper clubs, for example, at the centre, which had never been done. And now it is constantly hired out for, you know, different pop-ups, supper clubs, private functions. And so that's one, you know, revenue stream. And the other thing, I guess, is in terms of the food offering at the lunch club, if we look, you know, a few decades down the line, sad to say, you know, these elders won't be around anymore. Who will be coming and what will they be wanting to eat? I think it's very important that we look at the menu and continue to evolve it. You know, for me, for example, I'm plant-based, and I know that a lot of people are put off coming because we always have to have meat on the menu because the elders, you know, it's just a cultural thing. You know, you've got to have the bone broth, you've got to have the, you know, the meat and rice. But I'd love to see us being a bit more playful and innovative with that menu while retaining those kind of cultural touch points that make it culturally specific, as it were.
Barclay, you mentioned in your essay, just picking up on that, the kind of vegan food on offer in these Polish cultural centres and how maybe they're not adapting as quickly to cafes and restaurant cultures in Poland to catering for things like being plant-based. So I wonder how you think about the kind of future role of community clubs in how they offer food to kind of London's population.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's a specific issue with the Polish clubs in the sense that Warsaw a few years ago was ranked the 6th best vegan city in the world. But if you go to like Ognisko, there's about 2 vegan dishes on a menu that's about the length of my arm. And same with Polsk, there's very few like vegan dishes. And I think that's, you know, related to that disconnect between these kind of two Polands that are existing. Exactly what Jenny said, you know, there are elders in both of these centres who are not ready to let go of this menu. But I think, you know, to your earlier point about community centres and clubs and all of these spaces being under threat, I think, you know, that's a reflection of London, that's a reflection of rents, that's a reflection of how complicated it is to survive in this city. But I'm also very heartened that with every generation that comes, every new diaspora, it's kind of like sediment, you know, it's sedimentary. You have these different layers and they kind of fold into each other and they respond to the city in their own new and unique ways. So exactly like the community centre dropping Chinese from its name, that's a reflection of this whole new diaspora and this whole new world of migrants that are coming and that are going to bring their own response to the city. And it's a constant dialogue between the city and the diaspora, and they evolve together. And I think a lot of these spaces probably won't survive in their current form. And I think definitely Ognisko, the membership of the club itself, the average age is like 70, I think, even though the restaurant is open to everyone, it's very vibrant. But like the club will probably die at some point, but it will be replaced by something, and that'll be interesting and new. And I think community will disperse and find its niches within the city. It always adapts, it always finds itself. I just believe, you know, to Jenny's point earlier, like what is important and why people, when they seek identity, like my father, reach for food is because you are what you eat. And I really do believe that. And so we will always find expressions for that communion over the plate. I think that will just keep happening. It will just happen in different forms. It might not look like it did in the past, but that is eternal to me. And that will always be part of London.
And that's all for this edition of The Menu. Remember that we are back with a new episode again on Friday at 2000 London time. That's at midday in San Francisco. Also, don't forget to tune into our spin-off show Food Neighborhoods for a tour of some of the world's tastiest destinations. I am Chiara Rimella. This program was produced by Monica Lillis, and our sound engineers were Mariella Bevan, Tamsin Howard and Flynn Simons. Thanks for listening, and until next week.